What's up guys, I'm Simon here with TEQSPORT, and today we're going to be installing a leveling kit on this 3rd gen Tacoma. So let's get to it. All right, so first thing we're going to do is take off our wheels. I got a 21mm socket. All right, so to make this easier to get the shock out, what we're gonna do is disconnect our sway bar, and the important thing is to do that on both sides. That's going to basically allow you to articulate it a little bit further, get it further out of the way. Then we're gonna go from there and separate the upper control arm ball joint. We'll see if we can get it out, and worst case, we'll break the tie rod loose, but I don't think we'll need to do that. So we'll start with the sway bar and upper ball joint. To get the sway bar nut off, we used a 17mm socket. All right, you can see that falls down. Let's go ahead and grab the upper ball joint. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this cotter pin out with a pair of pliers. It's kind of an interesting cotter pin design. All right, we can probably just throw this away. We're gonna put new ones in, but I'll set it aside, disconnect the upper, might actually disconnect that bracket as well, just so the arm can move freely from the knuckle. So before I actually disconnect this ball joint, just to be safe, I'm gonna disconnect the bracket holding the ABS line on, and that'll just allow the arm to move freely of the knuckle, just in case we end up putting some tension on that. Might not need to, but just be safe. And just so I don't lose that, I'll go ahead and set it right back where we got it. This is a 10mm hex on this bolt right here. Thread it back in. Set this aside. Cotter pin's out. Our bracket is disconnected. Go ahead and see if we can fit our impact up in here. All right, and I'm actually not going to take that all the way off just yet. What I'm going to do is leave this threaded on just a bit so that I can hit this with a hammer and separate that joint. Once that joint separates, it's gonna fall down, but this nut will catch it. All right, so this part's always weird, hitting your truck with a hammer, but there's a flat surface on here, and you just gotta hit it pretty good, and that's going to vibrate this loose, and eventually it'll just pop, come right out. There it is. One more thing I'm gonna do before we even do that, I'm gonna leave this loose, and I'm gonna go ahead and take the bolts for the shock out. So we'll get the lower bolt, that's gonna be 219s, and then the upper bolts, I believe are gonna be 14s, but we'll check on that in just a second. All right, so we got our 19 out, we set the nut and washer aside. We'll set the bolt aside with those as well. We're gonna be reusing these when we put everything back together, so we don't wanna lose this. So you can see our arms moving kind of freely now. We're still just barely connected up here, so we'll be able to separate that in just a second. Before we do that, let's go ahead and crack these loose while everything's still together, and then our shock should come out nice and easy. So these are gonna be 14s up here. What I like to do is go ahead and get the hardest one to reach first, so that as the shock sinks down, it's not putting pressure on that back one. So we'll get that one off. It'll make it a little easier. And then these ones that are easiest to get, we'll do last. So since these are still tight, I can actually just thread this off by hand. You might not be so lucky if you live up north, but since we're in Georgia, we don't have too much rust, and this bolt's coming off, or this nut's coming off nice and easy. All right, last one right here. All right, so our shock's still resting in place, so I can just thread this one off by hand as well. All right, so one more little helpful trick you can do. You don't have to do this, but it might make your life a little easier. Basically, as you're moving the sway bar around, as everything I do here is also happening over on the other side, and these end links will get jammed up pretty easily while you're kind of wrestling with all this, trying to get the shock out. So this might just make it a little bit easier for you. Like I said, you don't have to do it, but I'll do it just to keep the end link pinned to the bar so that as I'm moving this up and down, we're not hitting as much. So I'm gonna go do that on the other side as well, and we'll pull that shock out. So now I can move this freely, not getting jammed up over there. So when I pull this out, the whole thing's gonna drop down, the arm's gonna shoot up. That's okay. All right, so now this is loose. So you can see we got the upper ball joint separated. Our knuckle is just kind of dangling, our spindle's kind of dangling. This truck is 2-wheel drive, but if it's 4-wheel drive, we'd want to keep a close eye on the axle, make sure we're not popping it out of place. And we also want to keep a close eye on the ABS line and the brake line. Just make sure we're not putting too much tension on those. These are fine for now, so we can kind of let this sit out of the way. And then one more thing you can do, if it makes it easier for you, is you can loosen up the bolt that holds in the upper control arm. There's some preload on those bushings, so it wants to stay in one position. You kind of have to fight with it to get it out of the way sometimes. If you don't want to do that, what you can do is just crack that loose, push it up out of the way, then the shock should be ready to come out. Same deal on here. It wants to stay in one position, but you kind of have to wrestle with it to get the shock out. These ones, however, we don't necessarily want to lose our alignment from where it is. Granted, we are going to go to the alignment rack after this, but if we don't have to mess with that, I'm going to try and avoid it. So I'm not going to do that trick down here. I'm just going to wrestle with the lower arm. But if we need to, we can do that on the upper. All right, so push the arm up and out of the way, and our shock is out. Now we'll go ahead and do that for the other side, and we'll get our top hat spacers on, throw it back in the truck, and we'll be sitting nice and level. Sometimes this lower bolt on the shock can be a little bit tricky to get out. Basically, the arm wants to go one direction, the shock wants to go the other, so it just kind of puts tension on the bolt. Luckily, the threads on this don't really start until up here. So that means you can take like a center punch or just even an impact rated extension and knock it out that way. If you're gonna do that, just be careful not to mess up the threads, but it is pretty forgiving in that sense. You also want to be careful as the threads ride across the actual mounting point on the control arm itself, just not to mar them up. So inspect your bolt if you do that. Make sure you didn't mess up your threads, but yeah. So we got bracket loose. We got this nut is loose, but not all the way off. Sway bar's loose. Bolts are out on the shock. Break that loose. Let it droop down. And actually, I was saying to inspect that bolt if you knock it out, but really just inspect all your hardware when you're doing this. Make sure that nothing's marred up or threads are messed up or anything like that. This is a perfect chance to swap it out if it's bad, if it needs it. So just keep an eye on that. So I'm actually gonna just push the sway bar all the way up here. Stay there, nice. Now, let the lower eyelet of the shock go off to the right. Push this upper out, we'll come out this way. So it's gonna drop down, go towards the front of the vehicle, down in this pocket, straight out. We got our shocks out, and that's how we'll put them back in. All right, so I've gone ahead and assembled our bolts into our spacer with a 8mm Allen head. So I got those nice and tight. Use a little bit of blue Loctite so they don't back their way out. We're gonna assemble these onto the tops of the strut. So the issue here is the studs from the OEM Bilsteins poke out a little bit taller than the actual height of the spacer. It's kind of a trade-off because this is a leveling kit, right? With this kit, you don't have to worry about upper control arms. You don't have to worry about bottoming out your shock, anything like that. It's kind of right at the max limit of what you can get away with before you start having to deal with that kind of stuff. But what that means is, since it's a bit shorter than some of the other options available, we're gonna have to cut these down. Now, if we were running a taller spacer with an upper control arm, we wouldn't have to worry about that. Our spacer would just be the height of the stud, but since it's not, I'm gonna grab a paint marker. I'm gonna mark what we need to cut off. I'm gonna run over to the fab area, cut that off real quick. Another important note is, before I actually cut that, I'm gonna thread a nut down onto it so that when I back it off, it'll clean up those threads for us and we won't have to worry about marred threads going back down. So this will be easy. Just kind of come in here, make sure we're a little bit short of, so I'm gonna cut kind of basically dead center on that. So pulled the spacer off. I'm gonna go ahead and thread the nuts on. Another trick to do this is, what we can do is take the OEM nuts that came on our struts, and these are actually kind of the perfect height to just cut what's left off. So I'm gonna put these on, thread them all the way down, and then I'm gonna cut off everything that I can see past that. And the other advantage of using the OEM ones in this case is we don't have to worry about messing up our nice new ones that came with the kit. So if these get a little mangled up coming off the fresh cut threads, that's no problem. All right, so on this one, I'm actually not even gonna bother doing the paint marker trick since I know that the height of this nut is exactly where we need to be. I'm just gonna thread these on and cut the exposed threads off. All right, go grab a cutoff wheel, rip through those real quick, and be ready to put our spacers on, throw these in the truck. All right, so we cut the exposed threads off of those studs with our OEM nuts threaded on there. Important to use the OEM nuts if you're gonna use that as your height gauge and not the ones that come with a kit, because the OEM ones are taller and skinnier, so the height is a little bit better to mark that cut. But now we're gonna back those off, and that should clean up any, I guess, marred threads from the actual cutting operation. We should be able to thread the spacers on top. So we'll take these back to the toolbox and get those ready to go. This guy, and I'll snug that up once I got all the other ones on. This is going to be a 15mm socket. We'll just go ahead and run these down. We'll get these snug with the impact and we'll tighten them up by hand. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the nuts off of the top hat studs, or the spacer stud, and then we'll be ready to lift this up into the truck. All right, so we got our spacers on. Let's put these in the truck. All right, so we'll push the sway bar up. Gonna come down off to the right towards the front of the vehicle. Push the arm out now. Down to the right with the two studs facing out. Shock is in. So I only had one set of hands to kind of keep everything where it needs to be. So looks a little silly, but what I ended up doing was just zip tying the arm to that upper position, zip tying the sway bar to that uppermost position. That gave me plenty of room to just push the shock right in. So a lot of things you kind of have to wrestle with and keep in one place at one time. So if you don't have an extra set of helping hands, you can kind of really just zip tie it where it needs to be, ratchet strap, anything like that. But yeah, not too bad. We got it installed. So we're gonna move on to the other side. I'm gonna come down through here, go off to the front of the arm, around to the side, go. All right, there it is. So both struts are resting in place, not bolted in. So now we got to go through, reinstall all the bolts that we took off, top hat, lower strut mount, reattach our spindle to the upper control arm, reattach our sway bar to the spindle, make sure everything's torqued nice and snug. Then we'll put our wheels back on and go get in alignment. And then I'm actually going to do that lower bolt before I tighten those down, just so the strut's loose. I can move it a little bit better. I might need that. So I went ahead and just loosened the bushings on the upper control arm. Now the arm moves freely, so it makes it a little bit easier to reattach the upper ball joint to the spindle. So we'll reattach the ABS bracket. Sway bars connected, these are torqued, this is torqued. Yeah, so this side's done. We'll go ahead and make sure everything on the other side's buttoned up and we'll be good to go. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing over here. Just go ahead and loosen the upper. That'll get it dropped down. All right, so this guy's nice and loose. When we retorque this, we just wanna do it at ride height, so there's no preload in the bushings when the truck's at rest. From there, we'll get it aligned and be good. All right, so sway bar, actually I went back over and disconnected it on the other side to get this nut attached to the upper ball joint. So basically it'll be the first thing you pull off and it'll be the last thing that you put on, aside from obviously the wheels. But now that we've got everything else torqued aside from the uppers, we can go ahead and tighten this down. Let's set the wheels back on, we'll set this down and we'll tighten our upper arms up and be good to go. So last thing we're gonna do before the alignment is retorque our upper control arm bolts. Want to get these very tight because sometimes these can be known to back out, so get them pretty good, but we're gonna do that with the truck sitting at ride height so that we're not putting an unnecessary preload on the actual bushings in the pivot itself. So we'll just reach in here with 219s. That should be good. All right, there it is, guys. That was our install of our leveling kit on this 3rd gen Tacoma. That was pretty straightforward, and now our truck's sitting a lot nicer. Got the front leveled out, and I think it looks pretty good. If you want a leveling kit for your 3rd gen Tacoma, check it out at TEQSPORT.com.